60,000 years ago, in the suffocating darkness of a cave carved deep into the Zagros Mountains of what is now Iraqi, a group of Neanderthals gathered around a body. The body had stopped breathing some hours before. The chest no longer rose. The eyes had turned to glass. The warmth was leaving the skin in slow, invisible waves, bleeding into the cold stone floor. They could have left it there. That is, after all, what every other animal on the face of the earth would have done. When a wolf dies in its den, the pack moves on. When an elephant collapses in the dust, the herd circles, touches the body with their trunks, and walks away. Death in the animal kingdom is a problem of logistics, not meaning. A dead body is a thing to be avoided because it attracts predators and spreads disease. There is no reason, no biological imperative, to do anything more than step around it. But the Neanderthals in Shanidar Cave did not step around it. They lowered the body into a shallow depression in the cave floor. They arranged the limbs. They positioned the dead with what appears, from the archaeological evidence unearthed by Ralph Solke and his team from Columbia University in the 1950s, and again confirmed by a new Cambridge University excavation published in the journal Antiquity in 2020, to have been deliberate care. And then, according to one famous and fiercely debated interpretation, they placed flowers around the body. Clusters of pollen from cornflowers, hollyhocks, and grape hyacinths were found embedded in the soil, surrounding the skeleton now catalogued as Shanidar IV. Let that settle for a moment. 60,000 years ago, a creature that we have long dismissed as a brute, a biological rough draft that evolution discarded, knelt in the dark and placed wildflowers around its dead. Whether the flowers were placed by grieving hands or carried there later by burrowing bees remains a subject of active scholarly debate. But the burial itself is not in question. The body was placed with intention, and that single act of intention opens a door that, once opened, can never be closed. Because to bury a body is to answer, however clumsily, the most dangerous question a conscious mind can ask. Not how did they die, not when did they die, but what happens next. 40,000 years before Shanidar, in a cave on Mount Carmel in modern Israel called Kafse, early Homo sapiens were asking the same question with even more elaborate gestures. The Kafse burials, dated to approximately 100,000 years ago by thermoluminescence analysis, include the remains of at least 15 individuals, many placed in deliberate fetal positions. Red ochre, a mineral pigment with no nutritional value and no practical application in daily survival, was rubbed into the bones. A child was buried with the antlers of a fallow deer cradled in its arms. Think about that child. Think about the mother, if it was a mother who placed those antlers in those small dead arms. What was she saying? What story was she telling? You are going somewhere, the gesture says, and you will need things for the journey. That is the moment it all began, not the invention of fire, not the sharpening of the first stone blade, not the planting of the first seed. The true birth of human civilization occurred the instant someone looked at a dead body and refused to accept that the story was over. In that refusal, they invented something more powerful than any tool or weapon. They invented the afterlife. And once the afterlife existed, everything changed. Consider the mechanics of it. A small band of humans, no more than 30 or 40 individuals, lives together on a harsh landscape. Resources are scarce. The temptation to steal, to hoard, to murder a rival in the night while others sleep is constant. How do you keep a group together? How do you enforce cooperation when the nearest police officer will not exist for another 90,000 years? You tell them the dead are watching. You tell them there is a place beneath the ground, or above the sky, or across a dark river, where every action is remembered, weighed, and judged. You tell them that death is not the end of accountability but the beginning. And suddenly, the invisible threat becomes more powerful than any visible punishment. You can outrun a spear. You can hide from a rival, but you cannot hide from a God who sees you after you die. The sociologist Robert Bellah, in his landmark work Religion and Human Evolution published in 2011, argued that religious ritual, including burial practices and the stories told around them, was not a byproduct of social complexity, but a precondition for it. Communities did not first organize themselves, and then develop religion to justify their organization. They developed ritual behavior, including the ritual treatment of the dead, and that behavior created the social cohesion necessary for complex organization to emerge. The afterlife, in Bellah's framework, is not a luxury of the imagination. It is an engineering blueprint for civilization itself. The numbers are staggering in their silence. The Population Reference Bureau estimates that since the emergence of anatomically modern humans, roughly 100 to 110 billion people have lived and died on this planet. Each of them, in some culture, at some point in history, was told a story about what happens when the breathing stops. Some were told of golden fields where the harvest is always ready. Some were told of dark courtrooms where a scribe reads the record of every lie. Some were told of frozen halls where the plate on the table is named hunger, and the knife beside it is named famine. Some were told of rivers that erase your memory, dissolving your identity like salt in black water. None of them were told nothing. That is the critical fact. No human culture ever discovered has offered its dead members absolute, uncommented silence. Even the cultures that came closest, the societies with the bleakest visions of what follows, still built a geography for the dead. They named it. They mapped it. They told you who rules it and what it looks like and what happens when you arrive. What if the afterlife was never really about the dead at all? What if every underworld ever designed, from the golden scales of Egypt to the Obsidian mountains of Mexico, was not a map of what comes after but a blueprint for controlling what comes before? What if the geography of the dead is the most powerful political technology ever invented, the original system of invisible surveillance? Think about it. Really think about it. The 10 Commandments are backed by the threat of divine judgment. The concept of karma in Hinduism and Buddhism functions as a cosmic accounting ledger that no amount of human cleverness can falsify. The Egyptian negative confessions are, in essence, a legal code enforced by the dead. The Norse division between Valhalla and Helheim was an incentive structure that rewarded warriors and penalized the passive. Every one of these systems used the afterlife as an enforcement mechanism for the values of the living world. The dead do not need an afterlife, the living do. And it is the living we will study in the chapters that follow, by walking the dark roads they built for their dead. We will begin in Egypt, where a civilization obsessed with order and permanence designed the most precisely calibrated judgment system in ancient history. You will stand in the Hall of Two Truths and watch as a jackal-headed god places a human heart on a golden scale, and a feather, a single ostrich feather representing truth and cosmic order, is placed on the other side. If the heart is heavy with lies, a monster will eat it, and the soul will cease to exist forever. Not punishment, annihilation. From there, we will travel to the frozen steppes of Central Asia, where Turkic shamans beat drums in the freezing dark and sent their spirits downward through layers of earth to negotiate with Erlik Khan, a horned, black-eyed god banished to the underworld for the crime of pride. He is not simply evil. He is the necessary other half of existence, the dark mirror without which light has no meaning. Then to Mesoamerica, where the Aztec lord of the dead, Mictlantecuhtli, sits in his skeletal splendor at the bottom of a 9-level underworld that every person who dies of natural causes must walk through for 4 years. Not as punishment, not as reward, simply as process. The Aztec afterlife is a machine, and death is its fuel. To Scandinavia, where a half-beautiful, half-rotting goddess named Hel presides over a hall so bleak that even its furniture is named after suffering. The Vikings did not fear battle. They feared the quiet death in bed, the straw death, because it condemned you to this frozen hall of permanent inaction. To Japan, where the god Izanami descended to the land of the dead to retrieve his beloved wife, Izanami, and found her not at rest but crawling with maggots and inhabited by thunder gods. Death in the Japanese tradition is not a place. It is a contagion. It is something you wash off. To Mesopotamia, whose scribes wrote the oldest underworld story ever recorded on clay tablets, telling of the goddess Inanna stripped of her power at 7 gates and hung on a hook like meat. Even the Queen of Heaven could not enter the underworld without being reduced to nothing. To Greece, where the hero Achilles, the most glorious warrior who ever lived, looked at Odysseus from the gray fields of the dead and said he would rather be a poor, anonymous, dirt-scrubbing servant on the surface of the earth than a crowned king in the shadow world below. And finally to India, where the god Yama, the first mortal ever to die, became death's judge and keeper of a ledger so detailed that every single thought and intention of your life is recorded, measured, and used to calculate the exact nature of your next incarnation in an endless karmic cycle with no permanent escape. 8 gods of death, 8 underworlds, 8 answers to the same unanswerable question. But they are not really answers about death. They are confessions about life. The underworld a civilization builds tells you everything about what that civilization values, fears, punishes, and rewards. It tells you who holds power and how that power is justified. It tells you what kind of person the society considers worthy and what kind of person it considers waste. The afterlife is not a destination. It is a mirror, and when you look into it, you do not see the dead. You see the living, reflected in the strange dark glass of their own deepest terror. We begin the descent now. Take a breath. Remember the sunlight. The oldest surviving civilization to perfect the architecture of death did not dwell in caves. They built pyramids that pierced the sky like stone needles stitching the earth to heaven. And inside those pyramids, in burial chambers painted with gold and lapis lazuli, they placed a feather on a scale and dared to weigh the human soul. If the soul was found wanting, a monster with the head of a crocodile and the body of a lion crouched in the corner, waiting to eat it. Welcome to Egypt. The trial begins. A man named Ani stands in a hall he has never seen before, though he has imagined it every night of his life. He is a royal scribe from Thebes, and he is dead. He knows this because the jackal-headed god Anubis is holding his heart in dark, clawed hands, and the heart is no longer inside his chest. The Hall of Two Truths stretches out before him, vast and torchlit, the ceiling lost somewhere in the smoke above. The floor is polished stone, cold under his bare feet. Along the walls, 42 divine judges sit in perfect rows, each one representing a different district of Egypt, each one assigned to witness a different category of sin. Their eyes are the eyes of hawks and crocodiles and serpents. None of them blink. In the center of the hall, Anubis lowers Ani's heart onto one pan of a golden scale. It sits there, dark and glistening, roughly the size of a man's fist. On the other pan, a single ostrich feather, brilliant white with thin black edges, rests with impossible lightness. This is the feather of Mad, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. It weighs, in theological terms, exactly as much as a life lived without deceit. The ibis-headed god Thoth stands to the side with a reed pen and a roll of papyrus, waiting to record the verdict. He does not speak. He does not need to. And in the shadows behind the scale, something breathes. It is low to the ground. It has the head of a crocodile, the mane and forequarters of a lion, and the massive haunches of a hippopotamus. Its name is Ammon, the devourer of the dead, and it is looking at Ani's heart with the patient hunger of something that has eaten 10,000 souls and is still not full. If the heart weighs more than the feather, Ammon will eat it, and Ani will not go to hell. He will not be punished. He will simply stop existing. No torment, no afterlife, no second chance. He will be erased from the fabric of reality as though he had never been born. The Egyptians had a word for this, and the word carried more terror than any flame or whip. The word was nothingness. To the Egyptians, there was no fate worse than ceasing to be. This scene, preserved in extraordinary detail on the papyrus of Ani, dating to approximately 1250 BCE, and now housed in the British Museum, is the single most famous image of moral judgment in the ancient world, and it tells us something remarkable about the civilization that created it. The ancient Egyptians did not merely imagine an afterlife. They engineered one with the obsessive precision of an accounting firm, turning morality into a measurable quantity and death into a bureaucratic transaction where every lie you ever told had physical weight. To understand how they reached this extraordinary level of theological engineering, we need to begin with the God who made it all possible, the God who died first. Osiris was the Lord of the living before he became the Lord of the dead. According to the mythology recorded in multiple sources, most famously by the Greek historian Plutarch in his treatise on Isis and Osiris, Osiris ruled Egypt as a just and beloved king, teaching humanity agriculture, law, and worship. His brother Set, consumed by a jealousy so absolute it burned like a physical sickness, devised a plan. Set ordered the construction of a magnificent chest, elaborately decorated with gold and precious stones, built exactly to the measurements of Osiris's body. At a banquet, with the entire court watching, Set presented the chest and declared with a generous smile that whoever fit inside it perfectly could keep it as a gift. "Try it," Set said to his guests, one by one, watching each of them climb in and climb out, laughing, finding themselves too tall or too short. "Surely one of you is the right size." When Osiris lay down inside the chest, his body fitting the interior with surgical exactness, Set slammed the lid shut. His conspirators rushed forward. They sealed the chest with molten lead and threw it into the Nile. Osiris drowned in the dark. But death was not the end. His wife, the goddess Isis, tracked the chest across the sea to the city of Byblos in what is now Lebanon. She retrieved the body. Set found it, and this time he tore Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across the length of Egypt. Isis, relentless in her grief and her fury, searched the marshes and deserts and recovered every piece except one. She reassembled the broken god. She spoke the words of power. And Osiris, reconstituted but no longer able to return to the world of the living, descended to the underworld and became its eternal ruler. He became the first mummy. He became the first resurrected god. And he became the judge before whom every Egyptian soul would one day stand. Here is the theological innovation that would echo through millennia. predating and arguably influencing the Christian narrative of a dying and rising God by over 2,000 years. A deity who experiences death personally, who knows what it means to have the breathing stop and the light disappear, and who therefore possesses the authority to judge the dead not as an outsider, but as someone who has been there. When Ani stands before the scale, he is not facing a distant, abstract deity. He is facing a God who was murdered, dismembered, and reassembled, a God who understands death from the inside. But the scale itself is not enough. Before the heart is weighed, Ani must pass a verbal examination. He must stand before all 42 judges and recite what Egyptologists call the negative confessions, preserved in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead, most comprehensively translated by the scholar Raymond Faulkner in his 1972 edition. Ani must declare, one by one, the sins he has not committed, and the list is extraordinary in its specificity and its scope. It is not a list of 10 prohibitions. It is a list of 42, covering everything from murder to granular offenses of personal conduct. I have not stolen, Ani recites into the torchlight. I have not killed. I have not told lies. I have not caused anyone to weep. I have not acted with unnecessary cruelty. I have not eavesdropped. I have not polluted the water. I have not raised my voice in anger without justification. I have not turned my back on the words of truth. Listen to those confessions. Really listen. They are not a random collection of religious prohibitions. They are a comprehensive moral code, a complete ethical framework for living in a complex society disguised as a courtroom transcript. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not pollute the water. Do not make others weep unnecessarily. This is not theology. This is law. And it was being enforced not by a human judge who could be bribed or intimidated, but by gods who could see into the substance of your chest and measure the accumulated mass of your dishonesty. Consider what it means to believe, truly believe, that every lie you have ever told adds a fraction of weight to your heart, that your cruelties accumulate mass, gram by invisible gram, until the organ in your chest betrays you on the cosmic scale, that your kindnesses, your acts of truth and generosity, lighten you, make you transparent, make you as weightless as a feather. If you truly believed that, how would you live? The Egyptians believed it, and they lived accordingly. But the judgment was only the gateway. The Egyptians understood that a soul needs a body to inhabit in the afterlife, and so they developed the most sophisticated system of bodily preservation the ancient world ever produced. There is a chamber in Thebes. A priest of Anubis, his face covered by a jackal mask, works over a corpse by lamplight. Beside him, a young apprentice watches, simultaneously fascinated and nauseated. The process will take 70 days in total. The brain is irrelevant, the priest says, inserting a long bronze hook through the nostril of the corpse and stirring. Discard it. It is the heart that holds the person. The heart is where they think. The heart is where they feel. The heart is memory and character and the accumulated weight of everything they have ever done. Preserve the heart above all else. The irony cuts across the centuries. The Egyptians, who built monuments of such mathematical precision that they still inspire awe 4,000 years later, believed the brain was useless packing material to be thrown away. The heart was the seat of intelligence, personality, and moral weight. It was the heart that would sit on the scale. It was the heart that carried the evidence. The body was packed in natron, a natural desiccant, for 40 days. The dried organs, the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, were stored in 4 canopic jars guarded by 4 minor gods. The body was wrapped in linen strips inscribed with protective spells. and then the opening of the mouth ceremony was performed, a ritual in which the mouth, nose, eyes, and ears of the mummy were symbolically activated with sacred tools so that the dead could eat, breathe, see, and hear in the afterlife. The dead needed to eat. Think about what that implies. The Egyptian afterlife was not an abstraction, not a cloud-like state of spiritual bliss. It was a physical place with physical requirements. The dead walked. The dead ate bread. The dead drank beer. And the place where they did all of this, if they passed the weighing of the heart, was called the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds, also known as Aaru, was the Egyptian paradise, and it reveals more about ancient Egyptian values than any temple or tomb inscription. Because the Field of Reeds was not some alien landscape of otherworldly splendor. It was Egypt. It was a perfected, idealized version of Egypt itself, with rich soil, abundant harvests, gentle breezes off the Nile, and crucially, no taxes. The same irrigation canals, the same grain fields swaying in the breeze, the same blue sky reflected in the same brown river. But without the tax collectors, without the drought, without the locust swarms, without Pharaoh's labor conscription. The ultimate Egyptian dream was not transcendence. It was continuity. They wanted exactly the life they already had, just without the suffering. Imagine an entire civilization spending millennia building tombs, writing spells, mummifying corpses, and performing rituals, all in the pursuit of waking up after death in the same world they already knew, but without the parts that hurt. And this was not a private fantasy. Maat, the feather on the scale, was not merely individual morality, it was cosmic order. The scholar Janus Mann, in his 1990 study of the concept, demonstrated that Maat functioned as the operating system of Egyptian civilization. When Maat was maintained through virtuous behavior, honest governance, and proper ritual, the universe ran correctly. The Nile flooded on schedule. The crops grew. The sun rose. When Maat was violated, the universe destabilized. Pharaoh was the guarantor of Maat, the living link between the human world and the divine order. When Pharaoh was strong and just, Maat thrived. When Pharaoh was weak or corrupt, Maat faltered, and the consequences were not merely political. They were cosmic. The afterlife itself depended on order being maintained. The weighing of the heart, then, was not just a personal judgment. It was quality control for the entire universe. Every soul that passed the test reinforced the cosmic order. Every heart that failed and was devoured by Ammit represented a tiny fracture in the fabric of reality. The Egyptians weighed the soul with the precision of goldsmiths and the gravity of Supreme Court justices. They turned death into a technology. They made morality measurable, identity preservable, and the afterlife an engineering project spanning 3,000 years. But not every civilization approached death with such meticulous order. Far to the east of the Nile, on the vast frozen steppes of Siberia and Central Asia, a different kind of death god held court. He was not a serene, bandaged judge seated on a throne of cosmic balance. He was a rebel, banished and furious, with black eyes and horns like the branches of dead trees. His beard was forked and black and reached his knees. His palace was buried in the deepest possible darkness beneath the earth. And the only people brave or desperate enough to visit him were shamans, wild-eyed mystics who beat drums in the freezing night and slaughtered black animals as the price of admission to the throne room of the Lord of the Deep. His name was Erlik Khan, and he was waiting. On a winter night in the Altai Mountains, sometime in the 17th or 18th century, a child is dying. The child has been sick for 3 days. The fever came suddenly, without warning, in the way that fevers come when the nearest doctor is a week's ride across frozen steppe. The mother has tried every remedy she knows. She has wrapped the child in sheepskin. She has boiled herbs. She has prayed to the sky god Tengri, the eternal blue heaven, to look down and intervene. But the child's skin is turning the color of old snow, and the breathing is becoming shallow, and the mother knows that what is happening is not a natural illness. She believes, with the absolute certainty of a woman raised in the shamanic traditions of the Turkic peoples, that one of Erlik Khan's servants, an invisible spirit called an albis or a kormaz, has crept up from the underworld and is stealing her child's soul. She sends for the Karakam, the black shaman. He arrives after dark. He is an old man, dressed in a heavy leather coat hung with iron discs and animal bones that clatter when he moves. His drum is made of birch wood and horse hide, painted with symbols representing the upper, middle, and lower worlds. He does not examine the child. He does not ask about symptoms. He already knows what is happening. The soul is being dragged downward into Tamag, the underworld, where the Lord of the Deep sits on his throne and waits for tribute. The shaman orders a black ram to be brought. It must be entirely black without a single white hair because Erlik Khan will not accept impurity in a sacrifice. The ram is killed in the firelight. Its blood pools on the frozen ground, steaming in the cold air. The shaman begins to beat his drum. The rhythm starts slow, almost gentle, like a resting heartbeat, and then it accelerates, building into a pulse that shakes the walls of the yurt. The shaman's eyes roll back. His body sways. His voice drops into a register that does not entirely sound human. He is descending. In the trance state, the shaman's spirit travels downward through layers of earth and stone, passing through the middle world of the living and into the subterranean realm of Tamag. This is not a metaphor for the Turkic shamans who recorded these practices. This is reported as a literal journey, a spiritual voyage through actual geography. The ethnographer Wilhelm Radloff, a German-Russian scholar who spent years among the Altai peoples in the 1860s and published his findings in the monumental work O Siberian in 1884, transcribed shamanic invocations and trance narratives in extraordinary detail. The shamans described tunnels of darkness, rivers of black water, gates guarded by Erlik's demon servants, and at the very bottom, a palace of obsidian and bone. O Erlik, Lord of the Deep, Father of Shadows, the shaman chants, his voice recorded in Radloff's phonetic transcriptions. I come bearing the blood of a black ram. I come with smoke and with fire. I ask you to release what you have taken. Return the child's soul to the middle world. I offer you this blood in exchange. The black shaman does not command Erlik Khan. He negotiates. He bargains. He flatters and cajoles and offers gifts, because Erlik Khan is not a minor demon to be dismissed with a prayer. He is one of the two fundamental forces of the universe, and dismissing him would be like trying to argue with gravity. To understand Erlik Khan, you must understand the Turkic creation story, which exists in dozens of regional variations across Siberia, Central Asia, and the Altai Mountains. In the most widely recorded version, compiled by scholars including Radloff and later the Soviet ethnographer Leonid Potapov in the 1930s, the creator deity, called Kara, or in some versions Uljan, existed alone in a dark primordial void. He created the first being, Erlik, to be his companion and helper in the work of building the world. In some versions, Erlik helped create the earth itself, diving into the primordial ocean to bring up mud from which the land was formed. But Erlik was proud. The word that echoes across the various oral traditions is pride, and the parallels with the Judeo-Christian story of Lucifer's fall are structurally striking, though scholars like Jean-Paul Roux in his 1966 study of Old Turkic mythology have argued that these similarities are convergent rather than causally linked. Erlik wanted to create his own world. He wanted to rival the creator. He wanted to be more than a helper. He wanted to be equal. "I too can create," Erlik said to the sky, in a mythic fragment preserved across multiple Altai oral traditions. "I too can shape the world. Why should I serve when I can rule?" The creator god did not tolerate the rebellion. Erlik was cast out, thrown downward, banished from the sky and the Middle Earth and sent plummeting into the deepest darkness beneath the world, into Tamag, the Underworld, where he was condemned to rule over the dead, the diseased, and the damned. But here is the crucial distinction that separates Turkic cosmology from the Christian framework it superficially resembles. In Christianity, Satan is evil. His fall is a moral catastrophe, and his existence is a corruption of divine order. In the Turkic tradition, Erlik's banishment is not a corruption but a completion. The universe requires two poles, light and dark, above and below, Uljan and Erlik. The sky god governs the living. The earth god governs the dead. Neither can exist without the other. The cosmos is not a battle between good and evil. It is a balance between two necessary forces, and the shaman's role is not to destroy the darkness, but to negotiate with it. This is a worldview born from the landscape itself. The Siberian steppe is a place of extremes, winters that can kill a person in minutes, summers so brief they feel like interruptions. Life on the steppe is a constant negotiation with forces that are too vast and too indifferent to be defeated. You do not conquer a Siberian winter. You survive it by knowing its rules and paying its price. Erlik Khan is the personification of that principle. He is the winter itself, given a face and a throne. And what a face! The physical descriptions of Erlik Khan, compiled from multiple Altai oral traditions by Radloff, Potapov, and others, are among the most vivid and terrifying in all of world mythology. Erlik is described as an old man of immense physical presence. His eyes are black, completely black without whites. His eyebrows bristle like the tusks of a wild boar. His beard is forked and black and hangs to his knees. His horns branch from his skull like the limbs of a dead tree. In some descriptions, he has 8 toes on each foot and multiple arms. He rides a black bull or a black boar through the corridors of his underground palace, and his retinue includes legions of albis, demons who rise to the surface world to spread disease, madness, and death. But he is not random in his cruelty. The Altaisayan traditions, as documented by Potapov, depict Erlik as a judge, not merely a captor. Souls that arrive in Tamag are evaluated. Those who lived virtuous lives are sent upward to a form of paradise. Those who were wicked are condemned to the deeper levels of the underworld. Erlik, for all his terrifying appearance, follows a system. He is harsh but not arbitrary. He is the Lord of consequences. "You lived as you chose," one can imagine Erlik saying to an arriving soul, his black eyes reflecting the flames of the underground. "And now you face what your choices have earned." But why should the living have to negotiate with such a being? Why do the shamans risk the descent? Because in the Turkic worldview, illness is not random. When a child develops a sudden, unexplained fever, when a hunter falls from his horse for no apparent reason, when a woman dies in childbirth, these events are understood as acts of soul theft. Erlik's servants have reached up from the underworld and seized the person's soul, dragging it downward toward Tamag. The body remains alive for a time, but without the soul it will soon follow. The shaman is the specialist who can pursue the stolen soul. He enters the trance, descends through the layers of earth, locates the soul in Erlik's domain, and bargains for its release. The currency is sacrifice. The blood of black animals, the smoke of burning juniper, sometimes the promise of a future offering. The shaman is a diplomat working the border between the living and the dead, a specialist in the most dangerous negotiation imaginable. "Great Lord," the shaman says, his voice barely audible over the drum beats. I offer you the ram's blood, still warm, still rich. I offer you the smoke of sacred wood. In exchange, I ask for the child's soul. It is small and young and has not yet finished its work in the middle world. Surely you have enough old souls to keep you company. Let this young one return. From one of the most ancient and mysterious documents in Turkic history, we get a glimpse of how deeply this cosmological system was embedded in the culture. The Erlik, the Book of Omens, is a 10th century manuscript written in Old Turkic runic script, discovered in the sealed cave library of Dunhuang in western China. It contains divination texts and cosmological references that scholars believe reflect pre-Islamic Turkic religious practices. The Erlik does not explicitly name Erlik Khan, but its references to underworld forces, to the spirits that control fortune and misfortune, and to the ritual practices necessary to maintain balance between the upper and lower worlds, are consistent with the Erlik-centered cosmology documented in later Altai traditions. It is a remarkable artifact, a written snapshot of a belief system that was primarily oral, preserved by accident in a sealed cave for nearly 1,000 years. As Islam spread across Central Asia beginning in the 8th century, the figure of Erlik Khan did not vanish. He was absorbed. His characteristics merged with Islamic concepts of Iblis, the devil, and with the jinn, the supernatural beings of Arabic tradition. In Sufi mysticism practiced in Central Asia, the old shamanic practice of trans-journey to the underworld found new expression in mystical states of spiritual descent and ascent. The old negotiation continued, dressed in new theological clothing. The shaman became the dervish. The drum became the chant. But the essential structure, the living human descending into darkness to negotiate with the ruler of the deep, persisted. Because you cannot simply erase a god who represents half of reality. You can rename him. You can dress him in different clothes. But the darkness that Erlik Khan embodies, the cold, the sickness, the inevitable decay of all living things, does not care what name you give it. It is still there, beneath the frozen ground, waiting for the drum to beat and the blood to flow and the conversation to begin again. The Turkic shamans understood something that many later, supposedly more sophisticated civilizations forgot. You cannot defeat death. You cannot outlaw it. You cannot build a wall high enough or a prayer loud enough to keep it out. You can only negotiate. You can only bring an offering to the edge of the darkness and say, "Not this one. Not yet." And sometimes, on a winter night in the Altai Mountains, with the drum pounding and the fire casting long shadows against the walls of the yurt, the Lord of the Deep accepts the offering, and the child opens its eyes, and the soul returns from the dark. But not always. The Turkic shamans descended to the underworld to bargain for a single soul. They brought gifts. They spoke with respect. They asked permission. But across the ocean in the beating heart of Mesoamerica, the civilization of the Aztecs built a road to the land of the dead that required no shaman, no negotiation, and no mercy. It was not a bargain. It was a passage. A 4-year journey through 9 layers of increasingly impossible terrain, through crashing mountains and obsidian blades and winds that ripped the skin from your bones. And every single person who died of natural causes was required to walk it, utterly alone, without a guide, without a prayer, without hope of rescue. The road to Mictlan was waiting, and it was long. In Tenochtitlan, the island capital of the Aztec Empire, sometime in the middle of the 15th century, a farmer dies. He does not die in battle, which would have sent him to the eastern paradise, where he would accompany the sun across the sky each morning, transformed into a hummingbird or a butterfly. He does not die by drowning, which would have placed him in Tlalocan, the lush green paradise of the rain god Tlaloc. He does not die as a sacrificial offering, whose death feeds the machinery of the cosmos. He simply dies. A fever, perhaps. A wound that went bad. The ordinary, unremarkable death of a man who spent his years growing maize and squash in the floating gardens of the Chinampa system. His family washes the body. They wrap it in cotton cloth. His wife, with steady hands and a face carved from grief, places a piece of green jade inside his mouth. This is the currency he will need, not for a ferryman on a river as in the Greek tradition, but for the road itself. The jade is fuel for the journey. Then they bring the dog. It is a Zalitzcuintl, the small, hairless breed that the Aztecs kept not merely as pets, but as spiritual instruments. This particular dog is the color of dark earth, and it has known the farmer its entire life. The dog is killed with a cotton cord quickly, and its body is placed beside the farmer. Because the first obstacle on the road to Mictlan is a river, the Apanohuya, and the only creature that can guide a soul across that black water is a dog that knew and loved the dead person in life. But not just any dog. White dogs, according to the traditions recorded by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún in his monumental 16th century ethnographic work known as the Florentine Codex, would refuse to enter the water because they had already cleaned themselves. Black dogs would refuse because they had already stained themselves. Only a dog of mixed or intermediate color would agree to carry a soul across. The specificity of this detail is remarkable. Even in the cosmology of the dead, the Aztecs calibrated their requirements with an almost bureaucratic precision. The farmer's soul enters the road to Mictlan. He is alone. His wife cannot follow. His children cannot follow. The shaman cannot descend to negotiate on his behalf, as in the Turkic tradition. There is no advocate, no defense attorney, no character witness. The road is the road, and it must be walked. And the road is 4 years long. 4 years, not 4 days, not 4 months. 4 years of continuous walking through a landscape designed not to punish but to test, to strip, to reduce. The Aztec path to the land of the dead, as described in the Codex Vaticanus A and the accounts compiled by Sahagún, consists of 9 distinct levels, each one presenting a trial that must be endured. After crossing the river with the dog, the soul reaches Tepe Monomictlan, the place where the mountains meet. 2 enormous stone peaks slam together repeatedly like the jaws of a geological beast, and the soul must pass between them in the fractional instant when they are apart. There is no trick, no password. You run, and you either make it through or you are crushed. And if you are crushed, you simply reassemble yourself and try again, because in Mictlan you cannot die a second time. You can only be broken and reformed endlessly. The 3rd level is Ixtapetl, the mountain of obsidian. The Aztecs knew obsidian intimately. They used it for their sharpest blades, for surgical instruments, for the sacrificial knives that cut open human chests on the temple steps. They knew exactly what obsidian does to flesh, and they imagined an entire mountain of it, rising from the dark, every surface a razor edge, and the soul must climb it barefoot. The 4th level is Sehiloyan, the place of the cutting wind, an endless frozen plain where winds carry fragments of obsidian like snow shredding skin from bone. The 5th level, Pankukuatlakian, is a vast desert where the wind tosses you end over end like a flag in a hurricane. The 6th, Temaminaloyan, is a corridor where invisible hands shoot arrows from the dark, and you walk forward into the rain of stone-tipped shafts because there is nowhere else to go. The soul speaks to the dog as they walk, because the dog is the only companion who remains. Is there much farther to go? The soul asks, stumbling on ground it cannot see in a darkness it has not yet learned to navigate. The dog says nothing. It simply walks forward, its nails clicking on stone that has no temperature you could call warm. This is perhaps the most distinctive feature of the Aztec underworld. There is no moral component to the journey. The soul is not being punished for sins. The farmer was not a bad man. He was not a criminal. He lived a decent life, grew his crops, loved his wife, raised his children. He ended up on the road to Mictlan not because of anything he did wrong, but because of how he died. The road is not a consequence of moral failure. It is simply the route that natural death requires. The Aztecs made no pretense that the universe was fair. The universe was a machine, and death was one of its mechanical processes, and the road through Mictlan was the gearing through which that process operated. At the bottom of the 9 levels, after 4 years of walking, the soul arrives at Mictlan, the 9th and final depth. Here, traversing 9 rivers or lagoons in some accounts, reflecting on an entire lifetime of choices, the soul finally reaches the throne of Mictlantecuhtli and his wife Mictlantecuhtli. They are waiting. They are always waiting. Mictlantecuhtli is a skeleton, not a skeleton dressed in robes, not a skeleton wearing a ceremonial mask, but a true skeleton, bones exposed to the air, the skull grinning not with malice but with the simple fact of its own structure. A skull does not choose to grin. It simply is what a face looks like without the flesh. He wears owl feathers in what would have been his hair. A necklace of human eyeballs hangs around his vertebrae, the eyes staring in every direction simultaneously. His ear spools are carved from human bone. Archaeological evidence from the Templo Mayor excavations in Mexico City, led by Eduardo Matos Moctezuma beginning in 1978, uncovered life-size terracotta statues of Mictlantecuhtli, with traces of what appears to be real human blood on their surfaces. "You have arrived," Mictlantecuhtli says, and his voice is not cruel, it is patient. It is the voice of someone who has said this sentence so many times that the words have lost all meaning except their function. "You have walked the road. You have crossed the river. You have passed through the mountains and the wind and the obsidian and the arrows. You are here. Rest." And the soul rests, not in paradise, not in torment, simply in the silence at the bottom of the world, where the machinery of the cosmos hums in the dark and the dead accumulate like sediment in a riverbed. Why did the Aztecs design an afterlife like this? Why no judgment? Why no weighing of the heart, no ledger of sins, no courtroom drama? Because the Aztec universe operated on a fundamentally different principle from the Egyptian or the Greek. The Egyptian afterlife was about justice. The Greek afterlife was about memory and glory. The Aztec afterlife was about energy. The universe, in Aztec cosmology, is a system that requires constant input to continue functioning. The current age, called the fifth sun, exists only because the gods themselves sacrificed their bodies when the previous 4 suns had been destroyed. The sun rises each morning not because it is a law of physics, but because blood, divine or human, has been offered to keep it burning. This is where the Aztec practice of human sacrifice becomes comprehensible, if not comfortable. A priest stands atop the Templo Mayor, holding an obsidian knife. Below him, a captive warrior taken in battle lies on the sacrificial stone. The priest does not hate this man. The captive warrior, in many accounts, has been treated with honor and given fine food and clothing in the days before his death. "Your death is not wasted," the priest says, because in Aztec theology it genuinely is not. "Your blood feeds the sun. Your heart keeps the world alive. Without this, the fifth sun dies, and everything, every city, every child, every field of maize ceases to exist. The captive's heart is cut out and held up to the sky. The blood runs down the temple steps. The sun, presumably, continues to rise the next morning. This is not sadism. It is engineering. The Aztec cosmos is a machine with an energy deficit, and sacrifice is the fuel that keeps the gears turning. Death is not an ending in this system. It is a resource. The soul that walks the 4-year road to Mictlan is not being punished. It is being processed, recycled, returned to the cosmic substrate from which new life will eventually emerge. The Festival of the Dead in Aztec culture, presided over by Mictlantecuhtli, the Lady of the Dead, has survived through centuries of colonial suppression and religious syncretism to become the modern Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, one of the most visually spectacular and emotionally rich celebrations in contemporary Mexican culture. The marigold petals, the sugar skulls, the altars laden with food and photographs. Beneath the Catholic imagery and the carnival atmosphere, the ancient Aztec principle persists. The dead are not gone. They are below, waiting, resting, and once a year, a road opens, and they can smell the flowers and taste the food and know that the living have not forgotten them. Mictlan is perhaps the most emotionally neutral underworld in all of human mythology. It offers no comfort, but it also offers no cruelty beyond the mechanics of the transit. The road is hard because the road is hard, not because someone decided you deserve to suffer. There is a strange dignity in that neutrality, a refusal to lie about the nature of what is happening. You are dead. The road is long. Walk it. But not all civilizations could accept such neutrality. In the frozen north of Scandinavia, the Norse faced a vision of the afterlife that was, in its own way, far more psychologically devastating than any obsidian mountain or invisible arrow, because the Norse feared something worse than a hard road. They feared a destination where nothing happened at all. They feared not the journey but the arrival. They feared sitting down at a table where the plate was named hunger and the knife beside it was named famine, and knowing that they would sit there, cold and empty, for all of eternity, because they had committed the one sin their culture could not forgive. They had died without a weapon in their hands. A deeply scarred Viking warrior lies in his bed. He has survived 20 years of raiding. His body is a map of violence, a white scar across his collarbone from a Saxon sword, a missing finger lost to a Danish axe at the Battle of Asphodel, burn marks on his forearms from a longship fire off the coast of Northumbria. He has killed men in shield walls so tightly packed that the dead remained standing, propped up by the living on either side. He has rode through North Atlantic storms that swallowed entire fleets. He is, by every measure his society respects, a formidable and worthy man. And he is dying of a chest infection. Not on a battlefield, not with a sword in his fist, not charging at an enemy line with his teeth bared and the war cry tearing from his throat. He is dying in his own bed, on a straw mattress, in a longhouse that smells of smoke and tallow, while his wife holds a cup of water to his cracking lips and his grown son stands by the hearth, stoking a fire that cannot warm what is turning cold. The old warrior grabs his son by the tunic. His eyes are wide with a fear that 20 years of killing has never produced. The fear of battle is sharp and immediate and ends one way or another. This fear is different. This fear is permanent. "Take your spear," the old man whispers, his voice breaking. "Take your spear and cut me. Here." He touches his chest. "Just a small wound, a gash, anything. Make it look like I died fighting. Fool the All-Father. If I die on this straw, I belong to her. I cannot belong to her. I will not sit in the dark." But his son cannot do it. The son stands there, tears running into his beard, unable to drive a spear into his own father's body, even as an act of mercy. And the old man falls back onto the straw and dies. The feared straw daughter, the straw death, has claimed him. He will not go to Valhalla. He will not feast with Odin's chosen warriors in the golden hall where the mead flows and the battles renew each morning. He has been condemned by the arbitrary fact of his infection to the domain of hell. In the brutal arithmetic of Viking afterlife theology, how you lived meant far less than how you died. The Norse underworld, as described primarily in the prose Edda composed by the Icelandic scholar and politician Snorri Sturluson around 1220 CE, is a realm of cold, of gray, of absolute and unending inaction. And to understand why this particular afterlife was so terrifying to the people who imagined it, you must first understand its ruler, who did not choose her throne but was thrown onto it. Loki, the trickster god, fathered 3 children with the frost giantess Angerboda. Their names carry the weight of prophecy. The first was Fenrir, the enormous wolf who would one day break his chains and devour Odin at the end of the world. The second was Jormungandr, the serpent so vast it would eventually encircle the entire ocean and grasp its own tail. And the third was a girl. She was born half alive and half dead. One side of her body was the body of a young woman, pale-skinned and dark-haired, possessing a cold and terrible beauty. The other side was the body of a corpse, the flesh blue-black and decaying, the bones showing through in patches, the eye on that side clouded and sunken. She existed in a permanent state of decomposition, as though death were a tide that had risen to the midpoint of her body and stopped, suspended between 2 states without committing to either. When the gods of Asgard saw what Loki had produced, they were seized with a paranoid terror. Prophecies had warned them that Loki's offspring would bring about the destruction of the cosmos. Odin acted. He seized all 3 children. The serpent he flung into the ocean. The wolf he had chained to a boulder with a magical fetter. And the girl he picked up and threw downward into the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, into the primordial mist of Niflheim. "Rule over the sick," Odin commanded from the heights of Asgard, his single eye burning with the authority of a king disposing of a problem. "Rule over the old. Rule over those who die in their beds. They are yours, but leave the brave to me." The girl landed in the freezing dark and built her kingdom there. She was given no choice in the matter. She was not evil. She had not committed any crime. She was simply born monstrous, and Odin found her existence threatening, and he solved the problem by making her the warden of everyone he did not want. Her name was Hel, and her kingdom was called by the same name, though it occupied a region within the vast, primordial cold of Niflheim, the world of mist. Snorri Sturluson, in his Gylfaginning, describes Hel's domain with a specificity that reads like a real estate listing written by a poet in despair. Her hall is called Eldjidnir, which translates to something close to sleet cold or rain damp. It is a massive structure, large enough to receive all the souls of those who die without glory, which is to say the vast majority of humanity. The ceiling is so high it disappears into the freezing fog. The walls weep with condensation that never evaporates. And every object within the hall has been given a name, and every name is a small, precise act of cruelty. Imagine the dead Viking warrior arriving at this hall. He has walked through the fog of Niflheim, stumbling over roots and stones in a darkness so complete he cannot see his own hands. He reaches the gates. They are heavy iron, rusted and cold, and they open without resistance because Hel does not need to lock people in. There is nowhere else to go. He enters the hall. It stretches away from him in every direction, lit by a sourceless gray light that illuminates without warming. He sees a long wooden table, scarred and stained, with places set along its length. He sits. He is starving because the dead in Helheim remember hunger without satisfaction. A servant, silent and gray-skinned, places a plate before him. The plate is empty. Its name, Snorri tells us, is hunger. Hunger. He reaches for a knife. The knife is dull, useless, incapable of cutting anything. Its name is salt. Famine. He stands up, shaking with cold, and looks for a place to sleep. There is a bed along the wall, covered with thin, damp fabric. The bed's name is Kor, disease. The curtains hanging around it are named Blickjendabel, gleaming bale, which scholars interpret as gleaming misfortune or shining disaster. Everything you need is here. A plate, a knife, a bed. But everything is named after the negation of what it is supposed to provide. Food that brings hunger, a blade that brings famine, a bed that brings sickness. This is not an absence of things. It is the presence of things stripped of their purpose, objects that exist specifically to remind you what they cannot do. Hell sits at the far end of the hall on a throne that is never described as comfortable. Half her face is that of a young woman. Half is rotting meat. She watches the warrior take his seat, and she does not smile, and she does not frown. She simply acknowledges his arrival with the indifference of a bureaucrat who has processed this form 1,000,000 times. "Welcome to the dark," one imagines her saying, though Snorri does not give her this specific line. She does not need to say anything. The hall speaks for her. Now consider why this is more terrifying than fire and brimstone. Mictlan, the Aztec underworld, at least has a road. It has movement, progress, challenge. Even the Obsidian mountain is something to do. Naraka, the Hindu hell, has specific punishments calibrated to specific sins, and those punishments eventually end. The Christian hell has flames and screaming and a dramatic, operatic quality that, however terrible, at least implies energy and intensity. Hell has nothing. Hell is the absence of event. It is an eternity of sitting at a table with an empty plate, in a cold room, in a gray light, with no hope that anything will ever change. It is the afterlife equivalent of a rainy Sunday afternoon that lasts forever, except the rain is made of sleep, and the afternoon never becomes evening, and you cannot even sleep because your bed is named disease. For a Viking, this was specifically the worst possible outcome. Viking society, as documented in the Icelandic sagas and the Eddic poetry, placed supreme value on action, on doing. Your social worth was calculated in deeds. What raids did you join? What enemies did you face? What challenges did you overcome? A Viking man who sat idle was not merely lazy. He was, in the eyes of his community, barely human. There is a reason the word knighting, meaning a person without honor or courage, carried a weight in Old Norse that bordered on obscenity. To be a knighting was to be a non-person. Helheim was the knighting's eternity. It was the cosmic destination of every person who failed, by accident or by age or by illness, to achieve the one thing that mattered, a death in action. The warrior who died on the straw did not lack courage. He simply ran out of luck, and for that arbitrary misfortune, he was sentenced to forever. The most famous soul in Hell's domain was not a warrior at all. It was Balder, the most beloved god in all of Asgard. Balder was beautiful, gentle, and universally admired. He was the favorite son of Odin and Frigg, and through the malicious cleverness of Loki, who guided the hand of the blind god Hodder to throw a dart of mistletoe, the one substance in the cosmos that could harm him, Balder was killed. He did not die in battle. He died at a game, struck by a plant that should not have been able to pierce his skin. And because the manner of his death did not qualify as glorious combat, Balder's shining soul was instantly pulled downward, through the roots of Yggdrasil, into the freezing mist of Niflheim, into the hall of hell. The gods were devastated. Odin's brave son Hermod volunteered to ride to the underworld and bring Balder back. He borrowed Odin's 8-legged horse Sleipnir and rode downward for 9 nights through valleys so dark and deep that he could not see the ground. He leapt over the gates of Hell's domain and found Balder sitting in the place of honor beside the half-rotting queen, alive but diminished, a candle burning in an ocean of dark. Hermod begged, he pleaded, he invoked the authority of Asgard and the love of all creation. "I will set a condition," Hel said, and her voice was cold with the finality of someone who has absolute authority and knows it. "If everything in the entire world, both living and dead, weeps for Balder, he may return to the light. But if even one creature refuses to shed tears, he stays with me forever." Hermod raced back to the surface. The gods dispatched messengers across all 9 realms. They asked everything to weep for Balder, and everything did. The stones wept, the iron tools wept, the trees shed sap, the animals cried, the humans sobbed. The entire cosmos, down to its smallest component, produced tears for the shining god. The universe, for one moment, wept in unison. But in a dark cave, an old giantess sat alone beside a cold fire. Her name was Thok, and when the messengers came and asked her to weep, she looked at them with dry eyes. "Let Hell keep what she holds," Thok muttered, and turned back to the darkness. Thok was Loki in disguise, and because of that one refusal, because of a single set of dry eyes in a weeping universe, the most beloved god in all of Norse mythology was condemned to remain in the freezing dark forever. Even divine perfection could not negotiate a release from the finality that Hell represented. Modern scholars, particularly the Norse mythology expert John Lindo in his 2001 work Norse Mythology, A Guide, have pointed out an important caveat. Snorri Sturluson was writing in the 13th century, 200 years after Iceland had converted to Christianity. His descriptions of Helheim carry what scholars call the taint of Christian overlay. The sharp binary between glorious Valhalla above and miserable Helheim below maps suspiciously well onto the Christian division between heaven and hell. Many historians believe that in the earlier, pre-Christian Norse worldview, hell was not actually a place of punishment or horror. It was simply neutral. The dead went underground, as the dead naturally do, and they existed there without particular suffering or particular joy. The very word hell, etymologically, derives from an Old Norse root meaning to hide, to cover, to conceal. The underworld was simply the hidden place, the covered place, the where things go when they are no longer visible. But even if the original hell was neutral, the neutrality itself was the source of the horror. Because in a culture that placed supreme value on visible, public, strenuous action, to be hidden was to be erased. To be covered was to be forgotten. To be concealed was to become nothing. The Viking afterlife was terrifying not because it punished the dead, but because it did nothing to them. It was the cosmic equivalent of being ignored, of sitting in a room where no one looks at you, where no one speaks to you, where your plate is empty and your bed is cold, and the only sound is the slow drip of condensation from a ceiling you cannot see. The Norse feared a frozen silence where nothing ever happened again. But when we cross the sea to the volcanic islands of Japan, we find a different horror waiting. The Japanese underworld was not defined by stagnation or by neutral emptiness. It was defined by contamination. When the god Izanami descended to retrieve his beloved dead wife from the land of Yomi, he expected to find perhaps some version of the gray silence we have just described. Instead, he lit a torch. And what the torchlight revealed was not a goddess resting peacefully in the dark. It was a body crawling with maggots, inhabited by thunder gods, and so profoundly rotted that the sight of it would redefine an entire civilization's understanding of death as something that is not merely sad or inevitable but deeply, physically, spiritually contagious. Izanami is screaming. She has been screaming for what feels like hours, though time has lost its meaning in the act of creation. She is giving birth, as she has done many times before. She and her husband Izanagi, the divine couple who stirred the ocean with a jeweled spear and pulled up the islands of Japan from the brine, have been producing gods at a rate that suggests the cosmos is on a deadline. They have birthed gods of wind, gods of trees, gods of mountains, gods of rivers. Each birth is an act of world building, each child a new feature of the landscape. But this birth is different. The child forming inside her is Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, and fire by its nature burns everything it touches. She can feel it happening, the heat building inside her own body, the flame spreading outward from the center of creation. Her divine flesh is cooking from the inside. The pain is beyond anything the mythology attempts to quantify. The ancient texts, the Kojiki compiled by O no Yasumaro in 712 CE, and the Nihon Shoki completed in 720 CE, describe her death with a bluntness that borders on clinical. Izanami is burned to death by the birth of her own child, and from her vomit, her urine, and her feces as she dies, more gods are born. Even her dying body continues to create. Even her destruction is productive. Izanagi stands over the corpse of his wife, the woman who helped him build the world, the woman who stood beside him on the floating bridge of heaven and dipped the jeweled spear into the chaos below and pulled up solid ground, the mother of islands and gods and seasons. She is dead, and the child that killed her is screaming with a mouth made of flame. Izanagi takes his sword, the divine blade called Tatsuka no Tsurugi, and he cuts Kagutsuchi into pieces. From the blood that spatters across the rocks, more gods are born. Gods of thunder, gods of rain, gods of mountains forged in fire. Even in grief, even in the blind rage of a husband who has just lost everything, creation does not stop. The cosmos is indifferent to personal tragedy. But Izanagi is not indifferent. He cannot accept the loss. He will not accept it. And so he does what every grieving spouse in every mythology eventually does, or at least considers. He goes after her. He descends into Yomi, the land of the dead. Yomi, as described in the Kojiki, is not elaborately detailed. It is not the 9-layered architecture of Mictlan or the named geography of Helheim. It is simply described as dark, as being beneath the earth, as being a place from which nothing living should expect to return unchanged. The entrance might be a cave, or a slope descending into shadow. The texts are deliberately vague about the precise location, which gives Yomi a quality that the more architecturally specific underworlds lack, the feeling that it could be anywhere, that the border between the living world and the dead one is not a grand gate or a wide river but a shadow in the corner of a field, a darkness at the back of a cave, a threshold that you might cross without realizing it until it was too late. Izanagi calls out into the dark. Izanami, my beloved, the lands we created together are not yet finished. Come back with me. There is more work to do. And from the darkness her voice answers, but it is changed. It is her voice, recognizably her voice, but with something underneath it, a hollowness, a wet quality as though the words are being spoken through liquid. My husband, she says, and the Kojiki preserves this dialogue with the stripped-down precision of a courtroom transcript. You have come too late. I have already eaten the food of Yomi. I have taken the hearth food of the land of the dead into my body, and it has become part of me, and I cannot simply leave as though nothing has changed. This is a mythological motif that appears across cultures. Persephone's pomegranate seeds in the Greek tradition bind her to Hades for part of each year. Inanna's consumption of underworld food in the Mesopotamian texts subjects her to its jurisdiction. To eat the food of the dead is to be chemically altered, metabolically absorbed into the realm of death. It is not a rule imposed from outside. It is a change that happens inside the body. But I will try, Izanami continues. I will go to the gods of Yomi and ask them to release me. I will negotiate, but you must promise me something. You must not look at me. You must not try to see me in the dark. Wait for me, be patient, and do not look. Izanagi promises, and he waits. He waits in the darkness at the border of the dead world, surrounded by a silence so complete that he can hear his own blood moving through his veins. He waits beyond what feels like patience and into what starts to feel like abandonment. She does not come back. The darkness does not change. No sound reaches him from the depths. He breaks the promise. The Kajiki describes the moment with a precision that suggests even the ancient authors understood its importance as the pivotal instant in the mythology. Izanagi takes one of the thick teeth from his hair comb. He snaps it off, and he sets fire to it. The makeshift torch flares to life. The light spills forward into the chamber where Izanami has been waiting. And what the light reveals is the most visceral, physically repulsive image in all of Japanese mythology. Izanami's body is in an advanced state of decomposition. Her flesh is swollen and discolored, and writhing with maggots that move beneath the skin like currents in a slow river. Her limbs are bloated. Her face is distorted beyond recognition. And nesting in the ruins of her body, seated in her decaying chest and belly and skull, are 8 thunder gods, the Ragin, their small, terrible forms crackling with lightning as they inhabit her corpse like parasites in a host. This is not a peaceful dead goddess resting in shadows. This is a body in the act of being consumed by its own decomposition, occupied by forces that have moved in where life moved out. The mythology does not flinch from the physicality of it. It does not suggest that Izanami is spiritually transformed or metaphysically altered. She is rotting. She is being eaten. She is the reality of what a body becomes when you strip away the stories we tell about death being peaceful or dignified or beautiful. Izanagi screams and runs. "You have shamed me," Izanami shrieks from behind him, and her voice is no longer hollow. It is filled with a rage so vast it seems to tear the darkness itself. "You swore you would not look. You swore you would wait, and you would not look, and you looked, and now you have seen me, and you are disgusted. You are disgusted by what I have become, by what your own dead wife looks like." She chases him. She sends the thunder gods after him. She sends the hideous hags of Yomi after him. Izanagi runs up the slope toward the light, throwing objects behind him that magically transform into obstacles. He throws his headdress, which becomes grapes that the pursuing creatures stop to eat. He throws his comb, which becomes bamboo shoots. He reaches the border of the living world just ahead of the final pursuit and grabs a boulder so enormous that only a god could move it. He rolls it across the entrance to Yomi, sealing the passage between the living world and the dead world forever. The Chikishi no Akami, the great god of the road turning, is born in that boulder. The barrier between life and death becomes, itself, a deity. And then, standing on opposite sides of the rock, the two gods who created the Japanese islands exchange the words that will define the cycle of human existence for all of eternity. The Kajiki records the exchange, with the simplicity of a treaty being signed between hostile nations. "My beloved husband," Izanami says from behind the boulder, her voice muffled by stone but clear in its intent. "Because you have done this to me, because you have shamed me and sealed me in the dark, I will strangle 1,000 of your people every single day." And Izanagi, standing in the sunlight, covered in the filth and the stench of the underworld, answers her. "If you kill 1,000 each day, then I will cause 1,500 to be born each day." And that is it. That is the origin of human mortality in Japanese mythology. Not a fall from grace, not a punishment for sin, a divorce, a domestic argument between two gods who loved each other and were destroyed by the reality of what death does to a person you love. Izanami's threat is not vengeance against humanity. It is vengeance against her husband, and humanity happens to be caught in the blast radius. Birth must forever outpace death. 1,500 against 1,000. The margin is not generous, it is just enough. What happens next is arguably even more significant than the confrontation itself. Izanagi, having escaped from Yomi, is contaminated. He reeks of death. The filth of the underworld clings to him like grease. He has touched the dead, seen the dead, breathed the air of the dead, and in doing so he has absorbed something that the Shinto tradition would come to call kegir, spiritual pollution, impurity, defilement. Kegir is not sin. It is not a moral failing. It is a condition, like a disease, that attaches itself to anyone who comes into contact with death, blood, or certain bodily processes. It is not about blame. It is about contamination, and it must be washed off. Izanagi goes to the sea. He strips off his filthy clothes, each discarded garment producing new gods as it hits the ground. He enters the water and performs the ritual that Shinto would come to know as misogi, the purification by water. And as he washes, as the death pollution leaves his body and dissolves into the ocean, gods are born from the very act of cleansing. From his left eye, washed clean of the darkness of Yomi, Amaterasu is born, the goddess of the sun. From his right eye, Tsukiyomi, the god of the moon. From his nose, Susanoo, the god of storms. The three most important deities in the entire Shinto pantheon are born from the act of washing death away. Creation, in this mythology, is not the opposite of death. It is the process of cleaning up after death. It is what happens when you scrub the contamination off your skin and the residue transforms into light. This has had profound and lasting consequences for Japanese culture. Shinto, the indigenous spiritual tradition of Japan, is a religion of purity. Its rituals are overwhelmingly concerned with purification, with hairy ceremonies that cleanse individuals, objects, and spaces of kegir. And death is the most potent source of kegir in the entire system. This is why, historically, Shinto shrines do not handle funerals. Death is Buddhist work in Japan. When someone dies, it is a Buddhist priest who performs the funeral rites because Shinto cannot risk the contamination. This division of labor between two entire religious traditions, one handling life and one handling death, has its roots directly in the myth of Izanagi and Izanami. Shinto chose the sunlight. Buddhism was assigned the dark. The consequences extended beyond theology into social structure. The Burakumin, a social outcast group in Japan whose discrimination persists in subtle forms even today, were historically defined by their association with death-related occupations: butchers, tanners, undertakers, executioners. Their work brought them into contact with dead bodies, dead animals, and the pollution that death carries. In a culture where kegir is a contagious condition, the people who handle the contaminated become contaminated themselves, and the contamination spreads to their families. their descendants, their entire social identity. The scholar Ian Neary, in his work on pre-war Japanese social control, traced the roots of burycuman discrimination directly to the Shinto concepts of purity and pollution that emerged from the Izanami myth. Death in the Japanese spiritual architecture is not a place. It is a substance. It is something that clings to you, gets under your fingernails, saturates your clothing, and must be physically, ritually removed before you can rejoin the world of the clean and the living. This is perhaps the most intimate vision of death in all the underworld mythologies we have explored. The Egyptian afterlife is a courtroom. The Turkic underworld is a negotiation. The Aztec road is a machine. The Norse hall is a cold, empty room. But the Japanese underworld is a body, a specific body, the body of someone you loved, seen in the unforgiving light after the flesh has begun its inevitable return to the earth. The horror of Yomi is not architectural, it is personal. It is the horror of discovering that the person you loved most in the world is, underneath the skin, the same decaying meat as everything else that dies. And the only response to that horror, the only possible recovery, is to wash, to enter the water, to scrub the death off, and to hope that from the act of cleaning, something new and bright is born. In Japan, death is something you wash off. But far to the west, in the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, the oldest literate civilization in human history wrote down their underworld on clay tablets nearly 4,000 years ago. And their verdict was the simplest and the most devastating of all. There is no washing. There is no purification. There is no negotiation, no road, no trial, no balance. The dead eat dust. They wear feathers. And even the most powerful goddess in the sky was stripped naked at 7 gates and hung on a hook like drying meat. The rules of the underworld are perfect, the gatekeeper told her. Do not question them. Inanna, queen of heaven, goddess of love and war and the morning star, the most powerful female deity in the Sumerian pantheon, stands before a gate made of something darker than bronze. She is wearing everything that makes her who she is. On her head the shugra, the crown of the steppe. Around her neck a necklace of lapis lazuli the color of a midnight sky. On her chest a breastplate of polished stone. Around her waist a belt studded with birthstones. On her wrists gold cuffs. In her hand a lapis measuring rod and line, the tools of divine authority. Over her body a royal robe that marks her as sovereign over the upper world. She has come to the underworld. She has come to Kur, to Erkala, to the land that is known by many names but whose meaning is always the same, the place from which no one returns. Her reasons for coming are debated by scholars across 4,000 years of interpretation. The Sumerian text known as the Descent of Inanna, dated to approximately 1900 to 1600 BCE, the oldest recorded underworld narrative in human history, suggests she has come to attend the funeral of Gugalana, the bull of heaven, who was the husband of her older sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. Other interpretations, including those proposed by the scholar Samuel Noah Kramer in his landmark 1951 translation, suggest that Inanna has come to extend her dominion. She rules the sky. Why not rule the earth beneath it as well? Whatever her motivation, the gatekeeper Neti stops her. Neti is not a warrior. He is not a monster. He is a functionary, a clerk with a clipboard, the first bureaucrat in the history of literature. My lady, Neti says, I must inform my mistress of your arrival. He goes inside, he returns. He has his instructions. My mistress says you may enter, Neti tells Inanna, but you must pass through the 7 gates, and at each gate you must remove one of your garments. Why? Inanna asks, And in this single syllable we hear something that sounds remarkably like the first recorded objection of the powerful to the demands of procedure. "The rules of the underworld are perfect, Inanna," Nettie replies. "Do not question them." At the first gate they take her crown. She protests because the crown is her identity, the physical object that marks her as who she is. But Nettie repeats the formula with the patience of someone who has said it before and will say it again. "The rules are perfect. Do not question them." She takes off the crown and walks forward. At the second gate they take her necklace of lapis lazuli. At the third her breast ornaments. At the fourth her belt. At the fifth her gold wrist cuffs. At the sixth her measuring rod and line. At the seventh and final gate they take her robe. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, enters the throne room of the underworld naked, stripped of every emblem of her power, every marker of her divine status, every physical artifact that separated her from any ordinary soul who had ever descended into the dark. She is, at this moment, nothing. She is a body without title, without instrument, without armor. The most powerful goddess in the sky has been reduced, gate by gate, to raw and defenseless flesh. 4,000 years later, this image has lost none of its power. The slow, methodical stripping of identity is more devastating than any single act of violence could be. It is the bureaucratic version of destruction, not a battle, a process, a form being completed, line by line, until nothing remains. Ereshkigal is waiting. She sits on her throne in the dark, and the texts describe her not as a villain but as a presence, the queen of the great earth, whose name literally means lady of the great place below. She is Inanna's older sister, the one who was given the underworld as her domain before Inanna was given the sky. She did not choose this kingdom any more than hell chose hers. She was assigned to it, and she has ruled it with the absoluteness that comes from having no higher authority to appeal to. The 7 judges of the underworld, the Anunnaki, fix their eyes on Inanna. These are not the same Anunnaki that modern conspiracy theorists have turned into aliens. These are divine judges, chthonic powers who preside over the laws of the dead, and their verdict is swift. Guilty. Inanna is struck dead. Her corpse is hung on a hook on the wall, like a piece of meat in a butcher's shop. Consider the theological audacity of this narrative. A goddess, the most celebrated and worshipped deity in the Sumerian world, descends to the underworld and is killed. Not defeated in battle, not tricked into a trap, simply judged and executed by a system of rules that applies to everyone, including gods. The ancient Sumerians looked at their most beloved goddess and said, "Even she is not exempt. The underworld is not a place where power matters. It is specifically the place where power stops mattering." For 3 days and 3 nights, Inanna hangs on the hook. The world above begins to die without her. The crops fail. Love ceases. War becomes purposeless. The god Enki, the wise one, the divine problem solver, creates 2 small, genderless beings from the dirt under his fingernails and sends them to the underworld with instructions. They are to find Ereshkigal and mimic her suffering, moaning when she moans, groaning when she groans, and through this act of sympathetic compassion, trick her into offering them a gift. They ask for the corpse on the hook. Inanna is revived. She returns to the upper world. But here is the rule that makes the Mesopotamian underworld uniquely terrifying in its administrative finality. No one leaves the underworld without providing a replacement. Someone else must take the empty hook. Someone must fill the space that Inanna's departure has created. Inanna walks through the cities of Sumer, looking for someone willing to take her place. She passes her devoted handmaiden Ninshubur, who has been mourning her in sackcloth and ash. She spares her. She passes 2 other loyal servants who have been weeping and suffering in her absence. She spares them too. Then she arrives at her own palace and finds her husband, Dumuzi, sitting on her throne, dressed in fine clothes, apparently not mourning her at all. "Take him," Inanna says. Dumuzi is seized by the demons of the underworld, the Gala, and dragged screaming into the dark. Eventually, his devoted sister Jeshtanana offers to share his sentence, and the final arrangement is a split year. Dumuzi spends half the year in the underworld, and his sister spends the other half. The seasonal cycle of death and renewal, the dying and returning god, the mythological engine behind agricultural fertility, is here, in this Sumerian text, thousands of years before the story of Persephone made the same point in Greek. But the descent of Inanna is not merely an origin story for the seasons. It is a statement about the nature of systems. The underworld has rules. The rules are applied without exception. Even if you are a god, you enter naked. Even if you are the queen of heaven, you can be hung on a hook, and if you leave, someone else must stay. The system does not create exceptions. The system does not care about your title, your power, or your arguments. The system simply runs. For the ordinary Sumerian, the implications were devastating. If Inanna herself could not escape the underworld without sacrifice, what hope did a farmer have? What hope did a merchant, a soldier, a mother, a child? The answer is recorded in one of the most haunting passages in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of great literature. In Tablet XII and in various earlier Sumerian poems about the underworld, the dead are described as existing in a state of permanent, monotonous deprivation. They eat clay. They drink dirty water. They are clothed in feather garments like birds, rustling in the permanent dark. There is no fire. There is no light. There is no taste, no pleasure, no memory of pleasure. There is rank to some degree. A man who died in battle might sit slightly higher than a man who died of disease. A man with many sons who could make offerings at his grave might receive the occasional trickle of nourishment from above. But the fundamental experience is the same for everyone. King and slave sit in the same dark room. Priest and prostitute eat the same clay. The vizier of the underworld is Namtar, whose name translates roughly to fate or destiny, and who functions as Ereshkigal's chief administrator. He assigns locations to the newly dead. He manages the bureaucracy of decay. He is not malicious. He is efficient. The underworld runs not on cruelty but on procedure, and procedure does not require passion or sadism. It only requires adherence to the form. "You are dead," one can imagine a shade whispering to a newcomer in the feathered dark, a farmer who has just arrived and is still blinking in the absence of light. "You are here now. The food is clay. The water is brown. There is no wind. There is no sun. The days do not change because there are no days. You will grow accustomed to it, not because it becomes bearable, but because you will forget what bearable felt like." Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, the hero who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, saw this future when his beloved friend Enkidu died and his ghost briefly returned to describe the underworld. The description shattered Gilgamesh. He refused to accept it. He launched himself on the most famous quest in literary history, the search for immortality, for a way to escape the clay and the feathers and the dark. He found Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood. He found a plant at the bottom of the sea that could restore youth, and a serpent ate the plant while Gilgamesh was bathing. The immortality was lost. The quest failed. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk and stood before the great walls of his city and understood, finally, that the only immortality available to him was the wall itself, the work, the thing he built that would outlast his body. But before the quest, before the failure, There is a moment in the epic, recorded in the old Babylonian version on a tablet now housed in the Yale Babylonian collection, that may be the earliest expression of what would later become the philosophy of Carpe Diem. The tavern keeper Sigeri, who lives at the edge of the world, sees the wild, grief-maddened Gilgamesh approaching her inn and asks why he looks so terrible. He tells her he is searching for eternal life. And Sigeri, with the weary wisdom of someone who has seen many travelers and heard many desperate quests, gives him the most anti-heroic advice in literary history. "Gilgamesh, where are you running to?" she asks. "You will never find the life you are looking for. When the gods created humanity, they kept immortality for themselves and gave death to humans. So Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, make merry each day, dance and play day and night. Let your clothes be clean, let your head be washed, bathe in fresh water. Look at the child who holds your hand. Let your wife enjoy herself in your lap. That is the lot of humanity. Stop running, stop searching, stop trying to cheat the system. The system is perfect. The underworld is waiting. You will eat clay when you arrive, so eat bread now. Drink beer now. Hold your child now. The Mesopotamian answer to the horror of the afterlife is not a better afterlife. It is a better life." The Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations created the first written afterlife, and their message, inscribed on tablets of baked clay that have survived 4 millennia of floods, fires, invasions, and the slow erasure of wind and sand, is perhaps the most honest statement any civilization has ever made about death. There is no escape. There is no negotiation that will save you permanently. The rules are perfect. Do not question them. The best you can do is live fully in the time you have, and build something that will last after the clay fills your mouth and the feathers settle over your shoulders. The Mesopotamians built an underworld of dust and procedure and absolute finality. But the Greeks, who inherited so many ideas from the cultures of Mesopotamia through trade and cultural contact, added a refinement that made their afterlife arguably the most psychologically devastating in the ancient world. They kept the boredom. They kept the gray fields. They kept the meaninglessness. But then they added something the Sumerians never imagined. They added a river that could erase your memory. And in a culture where being remembered was the only form of immortality available to mortals, a river that dissolved identity was not just a geographical feature of the underworld. It was the final, absolute weapon. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, is standing at the end of the world. He has sailed beyond the mapped seas, past the pillars of known geography, to a place where the ocean meets a shoreline that no living person was ever meant to reach. The land is wrapped in a perpetual twilight. The sun does not rise here. The sky is a ceiling of gray that presses down on the earth like a damp cloth over a face. This is the country of the Cimmerians, a people Homer describes as living in a mist so thick and permanent that daylight cannot penetrate it. They have never seen the sun. Odysseus is not here by choice. He has been sent by the witch Circe, who told him that the only way to learn the route home to Ithaca after 10 years of war and 10 years of wandering is to consult the dead. Specifically, he must speak with the blind prophet Tiresias, whose ghost resides in the underworld and whose prophetic gift persists even in death. So Odysseus digs a trench. He draws his bronze sword and cuts a square pit in the damp, dark earth. He pours into it the offering Circe prescribed, a mixture of milk and honey, then sweet wine, then water sprinkled with white barley. He prays to the dead, his voice hoarse in the cold air, promising future sacrifices, a barren heifer, a black ram. Then he takes a black sheep and holds it over the trench and slits its throat. The blood falls into the earth, rich and hot and steaming in the cold. And immediately from every direction, from the ground itself, from the cracks in the rocks, From the fog that hangs between the land and the non-existent sky, the dead begin to arrive. They come in thousands. Homer, in the 11th book of the Odyssey, the passage known as the Nekyia, describes them with a specific word that has no exact English equivalent. They are shades, not bodies, not spirits in the Christian sense. They are diminished versions of what they once were, transparent and flickering like afterimages burned into the retina by a bright light that has since been extinguished. They remember who they were barely, but they cannot touch anything, cannot taste anything, cannot feel anything. They are defined by what they have lost. And they are frantic. They swarm toward the blood in the trench because blood is life, and life is the one thing they no longer have. A single sip of the hot sheep's blood will, briefly, restore their solidity, their voice, their memory. For a few moments they can be themselves again. They push and crowd and whisper and moan, reaching for the trench with hands that pass through solid matter like fog through a fence. Odysseus holds them back with his sword. He needs to speak to Tiresias first, but the dead do not organize themselves into orderly queues. They cluster and swarm with the desperate energy of people who have been deprived of the most fundamental thing a person can possess, the experience of being real. Among the crowd, a figure steps forward who is not a stranger. It is Odysseus's own mother, Anticlea. She died while he was away at war, and he did not know. He sees her shade among the swirling dead, and the grief hits him like a physical blow. He tries to embrace her. His arms pass through her body 3 times as though she were made of smoke or shadow. She is there. She is not there. She is the memory of a person shaped into something that looks like a person but has lost the ability to be held. This is the specific cruelty of the Greek afterlife. It does not destroy the dead. It does not punish them for the most part. It simply reduces them. It takes everything that made them vivid, warm, tactile, and present in the world, and it replaces it with a semi-transparent, permanent twilight version that can speak but cannot be touched, that can remember but cannot act, that can see the blood of life steaming in a trench, and can taste it for one brief, terrible moment before sinking back into the gray. But the most devastating encounter in the Nekyia, the moment that has echoed through Western literature for nearly 3,000 years, is not with Tiresias or with Anticlea. It is with Achilles. Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, the man who, when given the choice between a long, peaceful, anonymous life and a short, violent, glorious one, chose glory without hesitation. He chose what the Greeks called kleos, the undying fame that comes from heroic deeds, because kleos was the only form of immortality available to mortals. The gods live forever. Humans do not. But if a human does something so magnificent, so brave, so brilliantly destructive that the poets sing of it for generations, then something of that human survives. Not the body, not the soul, the name, the story. Achilles chose the story. He went to Troy knowing he would die there. He killed Hector. He achieved the most perfect, concentrated burst of kleos in the history of the Greek world. His name would, in fact, be sung for 3,000 years and counting. By any measure of the system he chose to live by, Achilles won. And here he is, in the gray fields of the dead, shivering among the shades. Odysseus, trying to offer comfort, trying to honor the greatest hero of his generation, says something that he means as a compliment. Something like, "Surely you are honored here. Surely the dead worship you as their champion. Surely even in the underworld your glory shines." Achilles cuts him off, and what he says is the most devastating rejection of heroic ideology in all of ancient literature. The scholar Gregory Nagy, in his influential 1979 study The Best of the Achaeans, has argued that this passage represents a fundamental crisis in the Greek value system, a moment when the mythology turns on itself and questions its own deepest assumptions. "Do not try to make death sound noble, Odysseus," Achilles says, and his shade shivers in the sourceless gray light. "I would rather be a landless peasant, a hired laborer working someone else's field, a man with nothing, nothing at all, bound as a servant to another man who himself owns nothing, and be alive, than be king of kings down here among all these exhausted, worn-out dead." Listen to that confession. The greatest warrior in history, the man who defined the concept of heroic glory, the gold standard of Kleos, is standing in the afterlife he earned and saying that he would trade all of it, every last verse of the epic poems written about him, for the worst, most humiliating, most impoverished life imaginable, as long as that life included breathing, sunlight, and the ability to feel things. Every lie that the heroic code tells about death being noble is stripped bare in a single sentence. Achilles regrets his choice, not because the glory was insufficient, not because the poems were not beautiful enough, but because once you are dead, the glory is a sound you can no longer hear. The poems are a song sung in a room you can no longer enter. The Kleos survives, but the person it was attached to is gone, and in their place is a shade that shivers in gray fields and cannot remember what sunlight felt like. The gray fields are called the Asphodel meadows, and they are the default destination for the vast majority of Greek souls. Not the wicked, not the saintly, just the ordinary dead, people whose lives were neither spectacularly good nor spectacularly evil. They wander through pale, tasteless plants that grow without sunlight, in a flat, featureless landscape that extends in every direction without landmark or border. They do not suffer. They do not rejoice. They simply continue, reduced and colorless, like a photograph left in the sun, until all contrast has bleached away. The god who presides over this realm is Hades, and it is worth noting that Hades is perhaps the most misunderstood deity in modern popular culture. He is routinely cast as a villain, a Greek Satan, a scheming malcontent plotting against Olympus. He is none of these things. In the original mythology, Hades is an administrator. He was given the underworld as his portion when the three sons of Kronos divided the cosmos by lot. Zeus took the sky. Poseidon took the sea. Hades got the world beneath the earth. He did not choose it. He drew the short lot, and he has been running it with quiet, implacable efficiency ever since. Hades does not torture the dead. He does not laugh at their suffering. He sits on a throne of dark stone beside his wife Persephone, herself a captive of the underworld, and ensures that no soul ever leaves without authorization. His most common epithet was Polydegmon, the host of many, or sometimes simply the receiver. He receives. That is his function. The dead come to him and he receives them and they stay. The system is not cruel. The system is closed. The real geography of horror in the Greek underworld is distributed among specific locations that serve specific purposes. There is Tartarus, the deepest pit, reserved for those who directly offended the gods. Sisyphus, who cheated death twice, is condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, watching it roll back down each time he approaches the top. Tantalus, who served his own son as food to the gods to test their omniscience, stands in a pool of clear water that recedes whenever he bends to drink, beneath fruit trees whose branches pull away whenever he reaches for them. The punishments are precisely designed to produce an eternity of frustrated almost having. The torture is not in what is done to them, but in what is withheld from them. Sisyphus almost succeeds. Tantalus almost drinks. The horror is in the word almost. On the other side of the moral spectrum, Elysium, the Isles of the Blessed, offers paradise. But in the earliest Greek traditions, Elysium was not available to ordinary souls, no matter how virtuous. It was reserved for heroes with divine parentage, demigods and favorites of the Olympians. The common dead, no matter how wisely they lived, went to Asphodel. Later, the Orphic and Eleusinian mystery cults, whose influence grew through the classical period, democratized the afterlife by promising their initiates a better posthumous fate. Gold leaf tablets found in graves in southern Italy, dating to approximately the 4th century BCE, and analyzed in detail by Fritz Graf and Sarah Iles Johnston in their 2007 work Ritual Texts for the Afterlife, contain instructions for the dead, which paths to take in the underworld, which words to say to the guardians, which springs to drink from and which to avoid. Which brings us to the most insidious feature of the Greek underworld, the detail that makes it arguably the most psychologically devastating afterlife conception in the ancient world: the river Lethe. Lethe flows through the underworld, and its waters are a chemical weapon designed specifically to target the one thing the Greeks valued above all else: identity. To drink from Lethe is to forget, not to forget trivia or inconveniences, to forget everything: your name, your family, your achievements, your loves, your entire accumulated sense of who you are, dissolved in dark water and carried away. In a culture where kleos, the glory of the name, is the only available immortality, a river that erases your name is the ultimate weapon. It does not kill you. You are already dead. It does something worse. It completes the death by removing the last thing that survived it. Imagine a shade, freshly arrived in the underworld, kneeling beside the dark bank of the Lethe. The shade still remembers. It remembers the face of its wife, the laughter of its children, the smell of olive trees in the summer heat, the sound of waves against the hull of a fishing boat. These memories are the last living things in a dead person. They are the embers of a fire that has already gone out. And the shade cups the dark water in its translucent hands and drinks, and the embers go out, one by one, until the shade stands up and looks around and does not know where it is, why it is here, or who it ever was. And it walks into the gray fields and joins the other shades who have also forgotten, and they wander together in a crowd that has no purpose, no history, and no future. That is the final death, not the stopping of the heart, not the cooling of the skin. The moment you forget your own name. The Greeks understood, perhaps more clearly than any other ancient people, that identity is the thing that death ultimately consumes, and they built an underworld around that understanding with the precision of architects and the cruelty of philosophers. You spend your entire life building something, a reputation, a story, a legacy, and then you die and you drift through gray fields until you reach a dark river, and you drink because you are thirsty and there is nothing else, and everything you built dissolves in your mouth like sugar in hot water, and you are nothing. Is this not the fear that drives us still? Not the fear of pain or punishment or physical discomfort, but the fear that none of it mattered, that the universe does not care about your accomplishments, that given enough time, enough silence, enough gray, your name will be forgotten, and you will become indistinguishable from every other shade that ever wandered through a field of pale, tasteless weeds. The Greeks built an underworld of forgetting. They looked into the dark and saw not fire or ice or a skeletal judge with eyeball necklaces, but simple, absolute erasure. But across the world, in the subcontinent of India, a radically different system was taking shape. There, the afterlife was not a permanent destination at all. It was a temporary assignment. Death was not the end of accountability, but the beginning of a new calculation. And the judge, A dark-skinned figure riding a water buffalo, carrying a noose in one hand and a mace in the other, kept a ledger. Every thought, every intention, every act of cruelty, every moment of compassion, every lie and every truth, recorded by a scribe who never made errors and never granted appeals. The courtroom of Yama was open, and the records were complete. A soul arrives at a gate it has never seen before, and immediately knows it will never leave through. The gate is enormous, carved from a dark stone that absorbs the reddish light pulsing from somewhere deep inside the realm it guards. On either side of the entrance, 2 dogs stand motionless. They are massive, larger than any earthly dog, with thick muscular bodies and wide, flat heads. Each dog has 4 eyes, 2 in the normal position and 2 above them on the forehead, glowing faintly, scanning for something that ordinary vision cannot detect. These are the sentinels of the dead, described in the Rig Veda, one of the oldest religious texts in human history, composed approximately 1500 BCE. They are not there to attack, they are there to see. 4-eyed vision sees the invisible. It sees through the surface of a person to the accumulated weight of everything they have done. The soul passes between them and enters a vast space that functions simultaneously as a courtroom, a processing center, and a checkpoint. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a platform of dark stone, a figure sits on the back of a massive black water buffalo. The buffalo breathes slowly, its flanks rising and falling with the rhythm of geological time. The figure on its back has skin the color of a monsoon sky, dark and heavy with contained energy. His eyes are red, not with anger but with the permanent alertness of someone who has processed billions of cases and cannot afford to miss a detail. In his left hand he holds a pasha, a looped noose or lasso, the instrument with which he seizes souls at the moment of death and draws them to his court. In his right hand he holds a danda, a heavy mace or staff, the symbol of his absolute judicial authority. His name is Yama. He is the god of death, and he is the first mortal who ever died. This is the detail that transforms Yama from a conventional death deity into something fundamentally more complex and more sympathetic. According to the Rig Veda, specifically in Mandala 10, hymns 14 and 135, Yama was not born a god. He was born a man. The first man, or at least the first man to find the path that all mortals would eventually follow. He died, and because he was the first to make the journey, he became its authority. He did not conquer death. He experienced it, and that experience gave him the right to govern it. "Come forward," Yama says to the arriving soul, and his voice carries no cruelty and no warmth. It is the voice of a judge who has heard every possible excuse, every possible justification, every possible plea for mercy, and whose patience, while infinite, has long since ceased to include surprise. "I have been expecting you. I have been expecting you since the day you were born." Beside Yama, slightly lower on the platform, sits a figure who is, in some ways, even more important than the death god himself. His name is Chitragupta, and he is the divine scribe. He holds, according to the Garuda Purana, an enormous ledger, and in this ledger is written every single action that the arriving soul has performed during its lifetime. Every action. Not just the large, dramatic ones. Not just the murders and the kindnesses and the great sacrifices. Every small decision. Every casual cruelty. Every moment of impatience with a child. Every coin given to a beggar and every coin withheld. Every lie, including the lies told in the privacy of one's own mind. Every truth, including the truths that no one else heard. Chitragupta's ledger cannot be edited. It cannot be hacked or bribed or negotiated away. It is a perfect, complete, unfalsifiable record of a human life, from the first breath to the last, and it is the evidentiary basis for Yama's judgment. "Read," Yama says to Chitragupta, and the scribe begins. The concept of complete moral accounting, in which every deed generates a consequence that cannot be avoided, is the foundation of what Hindu and Buddhist traditions call karma. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit root kri, meaning to do, to act, to make. Karma is not fate. It is not a predetermined destiny. It is the mathematical sum of your choices. It is cause and effect applied to morality with the precision of a physicist measuring gravitational force. You drop a stone and it falls. You commit a cruelty and a consequence accrues. You perform an act of compassion and a different consequence accrues. Neither can be avoided. Neither expires. The ledger is always running. And this is where the Hindu concept of death diverges radically from every other afterlife system we have examined. In Egypt, the judgment is binary. Your heart is lighter than the feather, or it is not. You pass, or you are devoured. In Greece, the afterlife is a uniform gray regardless of how you lived, with exceptions only for demigods and monsters. In Mesopotamia, everyone eats clay. In the Norse system, the deciding factor is not how you lived, but how you died. All of these systems offer a single, permanent outcome. India says, no, death is not permanent. Judgment is not binary. The afterlife is a calibrated, temporary, hyperspecific assignment based on the precise mathematical weight of your accumulated karma. And when the assignment is complete, you are sent back. The Hindu scriptures, particularly the Bhagavata Purana in its 5th canto and the Vishnu Purana, describe Naraka not as a single hell, but as a complex of between 21 and 28 distinct levels, each designed for a specific category of transgression. This is not a generic lake of fire where everyone burns equally. This is a precision punishment system, where the nature of your suffering is directly calibrated to the nature of your sin. For the crime of theft, Chitragupta reads from the ledger, his voice neutral as a clerk reading a tax assessment. The soul is assigned to the realm of Tamisra, the darkness. For the crime of seizing another's property through force or deceit, the realm of Rorava, the terrible. For the crime of killing animals for pleasure, the realm of Kumbhipaka, the cooking pot. For the crime of abandoning one's sacred duties, the realm of Asipatravana, the forest of sword leaves, where the trees have blades instead of branches and the wind cuts as it passes. The list continues. Each sin has its corresponding chamber. Each punishment is designed to produce an understanding, through suffering, of the precise nature of the harm that was caused. A person who stole experiences the sensation of having everything taken from them. A person who killed for pleasure experiences the terror of being hunted. The punishment is not random vengeance. It is structured education. The universe in the Hindu framework is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to teach you. And if the lesson requires suffering, then suffering is the curriculum. But here is the crucial fact that separates Naraka from the Christian concept of hell, and from every other permanent afterlife system in world mythology. Naraka is temporary. You serve your sentence, however long it is, however painful, and then you leave. The punishment burns off the accumulated negative karma like fire burning impurities from gold. When the debt is paid, the soul is released, not into freedom but back into the cycle, back into another body, back into another life, back onto the wheel of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that is the fundamental structure of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. Your punishment is not revenge, Yama says to a soul that stands before him, confused and frightened, struggling to understand why it must suffer. Your punishment is a correction. When the debt is cleared, you will return. You will live again. You will have another chance. And the choices you make in that next life will generate new karma, positive or negative, and when that life ends, you will stand here again, and Chitragupta will read the book again, and the calculation will be performed again. There is no escape from the cycle. There is only progress through it. This is perhaps the most humane and simultaneously the most exhausting vision of the afterlife in human history. It offers hope. You can always do better next time. But it also offers no end point, no final release, no moment when the system says you have done enough, you may rest. The cycle continues. Life, death, judgment, punishment or reward, rebirth. Life, death, judgment, punishment or reward, rebirth, spinning through the eons like a wheel with no break. Unless you achieve moksha, liberation, the exit from the cycle, the moment when the accumulated karma reaches a state of perfect neutrality, as Hindu traditions describe it, or when the illusion of self is penetrated and abandoned, as Buddhist traditions frame it. Then and only then does the wheel stop, and the soul no longer passes through Yama's court, because there is no longer a self distinct enough to judge. But that is the work of saints and sages. For the vast majority of souls, the cycle continues. The concept of Yama traveled. As Buddhism spread from India across East and Southeast Asia, it carried the god of death with it, and each culture that received him reshaped him to fit its own anxieties and values. In China, Yama became Yanluoing, the king of hell, presiding over a bureaucratic underworld of 10 courts that owed as much to Chinese administrative traditions as to Indian theology. In Japan, he became Emuo, the fearsome judge depicted in countless scroll paintings and temple carvings, his face contorted in permanent assessment. In Korea, he became Yomna. In Tibet, he became Yama Dharmaraja, and the ferocious deity Yamantaka, the destroyer of death, was said to have defeated Yama himself, transforming the god of death from a judge into a protector of Buddhist practice. Tibetan Thangka paintings show Yamantaka with multiple arms and heads, trampling Yama underfoot, illustrating the Buddhist teaching that death itself can be transcended through spiritual discipline. Every other underworld we have visited is permanent. The Egyptian afterlife offers paradise or oblivion. The Greek afterlife offers a gray eternity of diminished existence. The Norse afterlife offers frozen stagnation. The Mesopotamian afterlife offers clay and feathers. Even the Aztec road, though it takes 4 years, has a final destination from which there is no return. But India says, death is a school. You attend classes. Some of those classes are extremely unpleasant and involve suffering that corresponds precisely to the suffering you caused. But eventually the semester ends. You graduate, or you repeat the grade in a different body. And the only way to leave the school entirely is to learn the lesson so thoroughly that there is nothing left to learn, and the distinction between student and curriculum dissolves, and the self that was being educated ceases to understand itself as separate from the education. Svarga, the Hindu heaven, is also temporary. This is a point that many Western readers find disorienting. If you accumulate enough positive karma, you are reborn in Svarga, a realm of divine pleasure and abundance. You feast with the gods. You drink soma. You enjoy comforts that earthly life cannot provide. But when your reserve of positive karma is depleted, like a bank account drained by a luxurious lifestyle, you fall. You descend back into the cycle. You are reborn in a lower state and must begin earning again. Neither punishment nor reward is permanent. The system is a cosmic thermostat, constantly adjusting, constantly recalibrating. Yama is not the creator of this system. He is its administrator. Chitragupta is not the author of the ledger. He is its recorder. The karma accumulates through the soul's own actions. No one forces you to steal. No one forces you to be kind. You make your choices, and the choices make your afterlife, and the afterlife makes your next life, and the next life makes new choices. It is an elegant and terrifying loop. It offers the comfort of justice. Nothing you do is wasted, and nothing you suffer is random. But it also offers the vertigo of infinity. There is always another turn of the wheel, always another life, always another judgment, stretching out beyond any conceivable endpoint. India gave death a ledger, a scribe, a judge, and a system of appeals. It made the afterlife not a prison but a school, not a punishment but a curriculum, not an ending but a turning point. And perhaps that is the most humane vision of death that any civilization has produced. The idea that no mistake is final, no cruelty is ultimate, and even the worst soul, after sufficient correction, gets another chance. But now we must step back. We must climb out of Naraka, out of Yomi, out of Helheim, out of Mictlan, out of Kur, out of the Jewett, out of Tameg, out of the Asphodel meadows. We must return to the surface and look at the full map. 8 underworlds, 8 civilizations, 8 death gods who sat on thrones of gold and bone and dark stone and ice. 8 answers to the same impossible question. What do they tell us about the creatures who built them? What do these dark geographies, these maps of terror and judgment and decay, reveal about the living human beings who spent millennia imagining them? And what does it say about us, right now, that we have our own underworld, a modern one, built not of stone and rivers and fire, but of data, algorithms, and the quiet terror of being forgotten in an infinite scroll? The final descent begins, and this time we are going down into ourselves. Come back to the cave. 60,000 years ago, in the Zagros Mountains, in the dark chamber of Shanidar, someone placed something beside a body. We have spent the entire journey arguing about what it was. A handful of wildflowers carried by grieving hands, pollen blown in by the wind or deposited by burrowing bees. The scientific debate continues, and it may never be fully resolved. But in a sense, the resolution is irrelevant, because the burial itself is not disputed. The body was placed with care. The limbs were arranged. Something was done to the dead that went beyond the biological imperative to simply walk away. That gesture, whatever its precise form, was the first draft of everything we have just explored. The weighing room in Egypt, the Obsidian Palace in Siberia, the 9-level road in Mexico, the sleet-cold hall in Scandinavia, the maggot-infested wife in Japan, the 7-gated bureaucracy in Mesopotamia, the gray, asphodel-covered fields in Greece, the Karmic courtroom in India. Every one of these underworlds began with that same fundamental impulse. The refusal to accept that death is the end of the story. We have walked 8 roads into 8 different darknesses. We have met 8 gods who rule over the dead. And now, standing back in the daylight with the mud of a dozen underworlds still on our shoes, we can see something that was invisible when we were down in the tunnels. We can see the pattern. We can see what these dark geographies, taken together, reveal about the species that built them. The first pattern is bureaucracy. Egypt weighed the heart on a scale and recorded the verdict with a reed pen. Mesopotamia stripped the dead of their identity at 7 administrative checkpoints. India assigned the dead to specific punishment levels based on itemized ledger entries. These are not mystical visions. These are filing systems. These are the theological equivalents of tax codes and court proceedings. And this is not a coincidence. The civilizations that developed complex afterlife bureaucracies, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India, were the same civilizations that developed the most sophisticated administrative systems in the ancient world. Egypt's massive irrigation projects, its centralized grain storage, its pharaonic command economy required armies of scribes tracking every bushel of wheat and every conscripted laborer. Mesopotamia invented writing itself, and the earliest examples of cuneiform are not poems or prayers but accounting records. Lists of grain, lists of cattle, lists of workers. India's Vedic social order, organized around caste and dharmic obligation, was a system of classification and categorization applied to every aspect of human existence. These societies projected their most powerful institutional technology onto the afterlife. If the state keeps records of your grain production, it makes perfect sense that the gods keep records of your moral production. The cosmic bureaucracy is the earthly bureaucracy with a longer memory and a bigger filing cabinet. The second pattern is landscape as mirror. Every underworld we visited is a recognizable distortion of the living world that created it. The Egyptian field of reeds is Egypt without the suffering. The same Nile, the same cropland, the same gentle irrigation, but without the drought and the taxes. Helheim is Scandinavia without the action. The same cold, the same gray sky, the same long dark winters, but without the raids, the combat, the purposeful violence that gave Viking life its meaning. Mictlan is Mesoamerica compressed into a vertical gauntlet. The same obsidian, the same wind, the same harsh terrain, transformed from an environment you navigate laterally in life to one you navigate vertically in death. Yomi is the volcanic earth of Japan turned inside out. Death as something geological, something lurking beneath the islands, a corruption waiting under the solid ground. The afterlife is never a foreign country. It is always a version of home, viewed through the particular lens of a culture's deepest anxiety. And that anxiety is always the same anxiety, expressed in different idioms. The fear of losing what defines you. For the Egyptians, identity must be preserved. The heart, the name, the physical body must survive intact, or the soul ceases to exist. Their deepest fear is not punishment but erasure. The cosmic system is designed to separate those who can prove their identity from those who cannot. For the Norse, action defines existence. You are what you do. Helheim is terrifying not because it hurts but because nothing happens. The deepest Viking fear is not pain but irrelevance. A society built on doing fears above all else a place where there is nothing to do. For the Greeks, memory is the last fortress of the self. The river Lethe does not kill. It erases memory, and with it, the accumulated identity that is the only form of Greek immortality. The deepest Greek fear is anonymity, the dissolving of the name into the gray. For the Japanese, purity defines the boundary between life and death. Kegir, the contamination of death, is not a moral failing but a physical condition that spreads through contact. The deepest Japanese fear is contagion, the idea that death is something you can catch, something that stains and must be scrubbed away. For the Aztecs, the cosmos is a machine that requires fuel. The deepest Aztec fear is not personal suffering but cosmic starvation, the death of the sun. The individual soul is less important than the system's continued operation. For the Turkic peoples, balance requires negotiation. The deepest Siberian fear is not darkness itself, but the failure to negotiate with darkness, the arrogance of thinking you can ignore half of reality. For the Mesopotamians, the deepest fear is the indifference of the system. The rules are perfect. They apply to everyone. Even gods cannot change them. The universe does not care about your objections. For the Indians, the deepest fear is not death but the infinity of consequence. Every action produces a reaction that cannot be avoided, and the cycle of reactions extends across lifetimes without end. The only escape is to stop acting entirely, to achieve a stillness so complete that the wheel has nothing to turn on. 8 fears, 8 mirrors, 8 confessions. The historian Philippe Aries, in his monumental 1981 work The Hour of Our Death, traced how Western attitudes toward death evolved over 1,000 years, from the early medieval acceptance of death as a familiar presence to the modern attempt to hide death behind hospital curtains and clinical language. Aries argued that each era's relationship to death is the most reliable index of its deepest values. Tell me how a society handles its dead, and I will tell you what that society believes about meaning, justice, and the value of a human life. The ancient civilizations we have explored handled their dead with extraordinary seriousness. They built pyramids and temples and sacrificial platforms. They wrote epics and composed hymns and carved texts into stone and clay and gold. They dressed their dead in fine linen and placed jade in their mouths and sacrificed dogs to accompany them on the road. They did all of this because they understood something that modern societies have largely forgotten. The dead are dangerous. Not because they are ghosts who haunt the living, but because their existence forces the living to confront the question that no amount of technology or distraction can permanently defer. What happens next? What about us? What is our underworld? We do not, most of us, believe in Asphodel or Mictlan or the weighing of the heart. We do not sacrifice black rams to Erlik Khan or wash death off our bodies in the sea. The ancient underworlds have become stories, material for audiobooks and YouTube documentaries and university courses in comparative religion. We tell ourselves, moved beyond them. But have we? Consider what happens when someone dies in the modern world. Their social media profiles persist. Their photographs remain online. Their emails sit in servers. Their digital footprint, the accumulated record of their searches and purchases and likes and messages, continues to exist in databases they never knew about and had no ability to control. A dead person's Instagram account accumulates followers. A dead person's Amazon account receives targeted advertisements. A dead person's email address is still receiving newsletters. This is our field of reeds. This is our asphodel. Not a place of gray weeds and transparent shades, but a digital half-life in which the remnants of a person persist without the person, generating interactions that feel alive but are hollow, creating the illusion of continued existence without any of the substance. Elaine Casket, in her 2019 study All the Ghosts in the Machine, documented the growing phenomenon of digital death and the profound discomfort it generates. When Facebook prompts you to wish a dead friend a happy birthday because the algorithm does not know the difference between the living and the dead, that is our version of Odysseus trying to embrace his mother's shade and watching his arms pass through smoke. The technology remembers, but the remembering is hollow. The remembering is a plate named hunger. And there is a modern Lethe. It is not a black river flowing through a subterranean cavern. It is the algorithm that buries your post beneath a billion others. It is the infinite scroll that guarantees that no matter what you create, no matter what you say, no matter how important you think your words are, they will be submerged within hours by the sheer volume of new content. The modern fear of death is not the fear of judgment or punishment. It is the fear of irrelevance. The fear that in a world producing more content in a single day than all the scribes of Mesopotamia produced in a millennium, your signal will be lost in the noise. Your name will scroll past. Your life will be reduced to a data point in a dataset too large for anyone to read. We have not escaped the underworld. We have digitized it. But perhaps in the end, the technology does not matter. The pyramids and the clay tablets and the social media servers are all different containers for the same impulse. The impulse that began in Shanidar Cave, 60,000 years ago, when someone looked at a dead body and refused to accept the silence. We build underworlds because we must, not because we know what death is, but because we cannot survive not knowing. The afterlife is not a geographical location or a theological proposition or a digital database. It is a story. It is the story we tell ourselves so that we can get up in the morning and face a day that might be our last without going mad. It is the story that says, this matters. What you do matters. How you live matters. The choices you make carry weight, literal weight, on a scale in a hall you have never seen, in a ledger kept by a scribe you have never met, in a record that cannot be erased. Is the story true? Does the heart actually weigh more or less than a feather? Does Chitragupta really have a ledger with your name in it? Does Erlik Khan truly sit on a throne of obsidian in the frozen dark, waiting for the drum to beat? The answer does not matter as much as the question. The question is what makes us human. The refusal to let death be merely biological, merely mechanical, merely the cessation of electrochemical activity in a mass of neurons. That refusal is the specific act that separates human death from animal death. A wolf dies. A human dies and then tells a story about it. A Neanderthal dies and someone places something beside the body. We do not know what they placed in Shanidar Cave. A flower, perhaps, a stone, a branch, a fistful of colored earth. It does not matter what it was. What matters is that they felt the need to place it. What matters is that standing above a body that would never move again, in a cold, dark cave at the edge of consciousness, someone decided that the silence was unacceptable and filled it with a gesture. Every pyramid, every hymn, every underworld, every god of death sitting on a throne of gold or bone or ice is a continuation of that gesture. An elaborate, beautiful, terrifying, and ultimately futile attempt to say to the void, we were here, we mattered, and whatever comes next, we are not leaving without marking the spot. Perhaps the most important underworld has not been built yet. Perhaps it is the one you are building right now, with every choice you make, every truth you tell, every act of cruelty you swallow, and every act of kindness you perform. Every day you live, you add weight to your heart, or take weight away. Every day you live, Chitragupta writes another line. Every day you live, you walk a little farther down a road that may be made of obsidian or asphodel or frozen silence or digital noise. The gods of death are patient. They have been waiting for 60,000 years. They are not going anywhere. And when you arrive, whatever you believe, whatever story you have been told, whatever version of the afterlife you carry in the back of your mind like a map to a country you have never visited, you will do what every human being who has ever lived has done in that final moment. You will look into the dark, and you will wonder what you see.